Okay, so your ShopRider wheelchair has developed error code 8, in which 8 of the LEDs here, 3 red, 4 yellow, and 1 green, flash rapidly, signaling error code 8. That means on this model that there's something wrong with the control board, and if you're bothering to look at something this obscure on the web, it probably means you own one of the ShopRider wheelchairs, and you have just now discovered that error code 8 means that the brain board here is fried and inoperable, and you've found out that the things cost several hundred to $1,000 or more to replace. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how to fix this and then get into the details. The ShopRider wheelchair that I'm working on here is the 6-wheeled model. It runs on two 12-volt lead-acid deep-cycle batteries. There's nothing special about them. You can see that the battery compartment is big enough to contain many different types and sizes of batteries. This particular style is just a typical one. Then the chair over here features the arm on the side where the controls are usually mounted. At least on this one, the controls swing out sideways. And this is where this mounting would normally be for the control box over here. Now, the first thing you got to do is remove the control box from its mounting arm here on the arm. This is 2 simple screws, but simple they are not. They glued the buggers in there. So you're going to need a hammer tool like this. This is about 10 to 15 bucks from Harbor Freight. The point of this is you put this down into the screw and you literally hit it with a hammer so that the down force twists the screw as it pushes down. If that sounds extreme, yeah, you really will need that, because otherwise you'll just strip the screw trying to get it out. The piece, at least on this model, unplugs here, though I believe there are other configurations available. This is the wire layout. The way this is set up is pink and white drive one motor, yellow and orange drive the other. Power in comes from black and red, and I'm not sure what the little tab on the side there is. That's probably some kind of error wire. Once you have removed the 2 screws here that anchor it to the arm of the wheelchair, then the whole assembly can be taken apart. This is held in place by 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are star keys, but they're not keyed with anything special, so a standard star bit will work. Once that's open, what will greet you is something a lot like this. This is all put together. This plugs directly into here in the way you would expect. Just like that. So just pop that out, set that aside, take off the gasket as well. You won't need that for this operation. Now, once you get to here, this thing seems to be one gigantic brick, and it's very hard to see how it works, but it's actually held together by 2 bolts. These 2 little tiny bolts, they're not star keys, they're hex heads. I'll get that to focus. Let's see, are these labeled? Yeah, okay. This is the hex head key that operates these 2 bolts. And if you're interested, the star key that will do the 4 bolts that hold that on is, let's see, is this right side up? No, I'm holding it upside down. Okay. This is the star key that'll work for that. There you go. So that's how you get this setting apart. These 2 screws are not nearly so bad. They're not glued in. Once you get these apart, you can take this apart with one caveat. This screw back here is not accessible until you pull these wires off. So when you open this thing up, you've got to pluck off all the wires, carefully take those off with a pair of pliers. That exposes this last screw here on the back. Once this and this have been removed, then you can pull this part way out. It will then snag on the power charger port, which you see here. The power charger port is designed to hook in here, and then there are 2 tabs here that lock it into place. So you've got to hold this like this. Take a chisel or other wide screwdriver and press down on both of these two tabs at once. Once that's the case, this charger port will pop out, and then the whole assembly can be disassembled. Now, a quick look at this on the underside shows the issue here. Anyone that's worked on electronics before immediately knows what we're looking at here. I had to look this up, and credit goes to the repair guy who put this out on the web, but the reason that these things fail and give error code 8, and apparently sometimes error code 7, is that the three, I believe these are electrolytic capacitors here, fail. A good capacitor should always have a flat top. These are generic good capacitors. Whenever you see a capacitor like this where the top has bulged out like that, that means the capacitor is trash and you have to replace it. The bad news on a setup like this is if you ask for the entire box, you're going to pay $250 to $1,000 depending on how good you are at shopping. The capacitors, by comparison, are a few cents each, and you can order them online. So what I'm going to try and do is solder in 3 replacement capacitors of equal values, and then reassemble this. And then if I get it right, this video will get posted online, and everyone will be able to copy my work. Oh, and just an FYI, wheelchair power supply here, if anybody's got this new or used, you may think it's something special. It is not. Any generic 12 or 24 volt charger that's commonly used on scooters and other inexpensive Chinese 12 volt lead acid 24 volt lead acid products is perfectly compatible with this and will jack right into the power supply. So yes, you can charge a wheelchair with your scooter charger or with anything else you got handy. Any 24 volt charger will charge this without complaint. After several days of waiting, the parts finally arrived from Amazon. They're about $6-7. What you're going to need for this is a 680 milliamp capacitor rated for 35 volts. You can see there's one of the old ones. You got to match these things such that the negative terminal is facing forward and the other terminal faces the other way. It doesn't really matter if you get it right as long as they copy each other. As long as this and this are the same, you're good to go. Also be aware that the original gold-plated terminals there are quite difficult to unsolder and get the piece through there. I've been having a heck of a time getting these things to go through, but fortunately they provided 3 mounting holes. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3 on the other side too. So if the solder jams up like it did for me, that's not a problem. You can just use one of the other 2 mounting holes and it should work just as well. Alright, so this is what the final job should look like. Anybody that's a professional solder expert would know that I'm pretty sloppy, but I got the job done. The old solder joint there is connected to the new wires coming through. We've matched the polarity, so the negative side on here is facing the same way as it was before. So now all we have to do is trim these off to make them safe to work with again, and then reassemble. Just an aside, you can see these are the old capacitors here that burned out. This is the capacitor from Amazon. You can tell at a glance that the Amazon capacitors are smaller despite having the same rating. Anytime you need to match them, you don't care about the physical size as far as performance goes. You just have to match that 35 volts, 680 milliamp or 680 microfarads. And occasionally when you do this, it's possible to get a close match just from old scrap electronics. This one is also 680 microfarads, 50 volts, which explains why it's a little bit bigger. But that was pulled from this, a power board from a defunct television. So you can go hunting for these capacitors on old electronics. That's certainly a thing you can do. This one here resurrected a television with dead capacitors. But as is often the case when you do that, it's hard to find enough of them. We need 3 for this. 1 wasn't going to cut it. And this one was considerably larger than the original. Meaning that in this case, with a housing here, where there's only this cavity to store the capacitors, Going bigger and cheaper wouldn't have made much sense in this case, even if we'd had 3 capacitors instead of only 1. And at last, here is the entire thing reassembled and back in business. This is what you should see when you turn one of these on. We get a reasonable number of lights. What else? 3 red, 4 yellow, and however many green represent battery charge. And you can see we now have a working chair. Works like it's supposed to. The only caveat here is replacing the capacitors, as I showed you, does not instantly fix everything. What replacing the capacitor does takes it from a error code 8 to an error code 7. Now, you think, how does that help? Okay. Error code 7 is supposed to mean that the joystick is faulty. The joystick is not faulty. You don't need to replace it. I found an example online. Apparently what needs to happen is you have to take with this thing still disassembled, you have to unplug the internal connector for the joystick here, power the thing on. That'll give you one light here and the yellow dial here, not the upper one, but the lower one. Then power it off, unplug it unplug all of this from the chair, plug this controller back inside the housing, power it back on. And what is supposed to happen is it's supposed to do what you can see it doing here, working as it is intended to. Now, in my case, it didn't do that instantly. Doing the unplug, replug, and power back on with this got me part of the way, but it didn't do all of it. Now, I did not do any further work after that point. All I did was the high-tech term of futzing with it. Yes, I know. That was just manipulating the joysticks in various ways as I powered it on and off, hitting these 2 buttons here, unplugging it, replugging it, plugging the power charger into the front, and somewhere along the way, in about 5 minutes of futzing with it, doing no other repairs internally or externally, we went from having 7 flashing lights to having steady flashing lights when I would hold it forward and then power it on. And then I would get a couple of seconds of moving around, and then it would go back to 7. And I just kept doing that, and after about 5 minutes of high-tech futzing with it, just using the controls, we got to where we are now, in which the chair responds like it's supposed to and works for the grand total price of $7 and change from Amazon for 3 new capacitors. Now, that last part, how we got there, I do not know. But I know this is like the 7th or 8th time I've powered this on. It does not seem like it's about to die. I took it on a run down the street. It worked fine. And since it's gone into this mode where it works properly, I have not seen 7 lights flashing again, and it's worked. So yeah, replacing those 3 capacitors for $8 will get you to either a fix or the 7 flashing lights. And if it takes you to 7, just do that trick where you unplug this internally in the housing, plug the whole housing in with power, turn it on, you get one light here solid, unplug this, replug this in the housing, plug the whole thing back in, and either that will fix your problem or that will fix your problem with a little bit of futzing here. So if you can do some basic soldering, if you can replace 3 capacitors, for about $7-8, you have very, very good odds of fixing this. I wish I could give you more details of exactly which of the little button presses I did here got us from 7 flashing lights back to full strength. I don't know, but for $8, I think it's probably worth your time. Best of luck to everybody on this. And one final shout out, if you find yourself dealing with other medical technologies like this, there is another thing that you might benefit from being aware of. Frank's Hospital Workshop. There is a website entitled Frank's Hospital Workshop, which does not videos like what I've done here, but he does do a few videos, but he hosts a lot of repair manuals, how-to guides, and Frank's Hospital Workshop is targeted at developing nations where they see a great deal of surplus equipment, like this chair, where it might be obsolete in America, but it still works fine and you can use it in whatever country you happen to be. But trying to find manuals and repair guides for it is really hard, and of course, it's no longer supported by the manufacturer anymore. So if you stumbled across this because you're an American user and you want this thing to work again, great. $8 in a couple hours will probably get you to a working chair. If you are in a foreign country, especially if you're a hospital user, nurse, doctor, what have you, look up Frank's Hospital Workshop. It is an excellent resource for how to do this kind of generic repair work. Best of luck to you, and I hope you have an uneventful day.